Sorry for ending the video abruptly. I actually ended up losing my focus and falling asleep immediately. So I will be continuing updating a student in this video, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, and God willing. Okay, to recapitulate, we will seek or locate the student that we wish to edit or update using the ID, send the updated information, and then returning the newly updated student. How could we achieve this? There are two approaches. Those approaches depend on if you are using the patch HTTP request or put HTTP request. Since we will not delve into requests or HTTP method mapping yet, I will cover the put approach instead of the patch approach. Then once we finish with designing the controller class or the resource class, I will return here again, inshallah, bi'ithnillah, and God willing, to show you how to cover patch. So here we will cover how you can update a student using the put HTTP request or method, however you wish to label it. Both are correct. Okay, firstly, the first step is to locate the record that we wish to edit using the ID. And then after we update the information with what we send here, we will return the updated student. Since we will be returning the updated student, this will be the student we retrieve using the ID. I will show you now. Student, let us call it new student, is equal to, we will need to find the student using this ID. How can we do that? We use this approach right here. You can also use this method, but I prefer to avoid invoking methods within other methods in service classes. That way everything is its own entity. So we will use this exact approach, student repository dot find by ID, or else throw, because this, remember, this returns an optional and we need to unwrap the optional object to retrieve student. So we will use, you can use or else throw, or else get, or you can also use get, but remember with get it is not the recommended approach because of this part right here. Does not check if it is present or not. Or else throw. Now remember, or else throw has a default exception that is thrown unless you pass in another exception or throw in another exception as an argument. That is a different story. We will cover exception mapping later and how we can handle exception mapping at an enterprise level. It will be slightly different than how we handle exceptions in the standard edition, but we will cover it inshallah bi'ithnillah and God willing later. Okay, we find the student record and create an object of that record. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to compare this with the newly updated information. Which information do we wish to keep? We wish to keep the updated information, which means that we will set what is here into here. If this student has a name, we will override the name in this student and update it with this one instead. Why? Because this is the newly updated information. This is the old information. How do we know that? Because it is being retrieved from the database. This is being retrieved from the user, from the client, from the customer that is actively updating the student, which means that this is the information that we need, not this one. This is from the database, which means that we need to update what is in the database with the newly obtained or newly retrieved information. So how do we do that? Oh, I forgot to create getters and setters. I just realized that. I will use Lombok for that. You can create the getters and setters, obviously. It is up to you. But it is best to use Lombok because honestly, it expedites the process greatly. When you use these two annotations, Lombok automatically generates getters and setters for you. So you can easily use those. You can also use the builder annotation if you would like to use the builder pattern, and I will show you both this and this. There's no need to keep this open, and there's no need to keep this open either. Okay. What are the different components of a student? We have the student ID, which we will not touch because it is generated automatically and it is already in the database. So if this student has an ID of 1, this student will also have an ID of 1. Normally this approach is not meant for updating the ID, though you can obviously update the ID or override it here as well. But if you override it, you will be creating a new record instead of actually updating the record, and we will see why in just a moment when we cover the return statement. We have first name, last name, GPA, courses, and biography, which means that we will have to override each of these with the new values. We will simply say new student dot set first name. See, it created it for you automatically, and it has this red chili pepper icon, which indicates that Lombok creates it for you. This is the Lombok icon. So what will be the first name of this student? It will be retrieved from here. This is why we pass in the updated student object, so we can compare this one with the one from the database, then override the values of the instance variables of the student from the database with the updated information. So we will simply say updated student dot get first name. Whatever first name is here, this is what we need. And thus we will override what used to be here. Then we will repeat the same process with last name, GPA, biography, courses, and so on and so forth. Updated student dot get last name. Remember, this is the updated one. This is what we want stored in the database. How do we store it? Through this process here. And then we will repeat the process. I will utilize the Zahi way all the way. So this will be GPA. This will also be GPA, and here the getter is also generated automatically for you through the getter annotation. That is why I asked you to download the Lombok dependency, so that we can have this amazingly short code instead of having a lengthy class because of the getters and setters. What else we have? Courses, if I recall correctly, and then biography. So this will be courses, and this will be biography. Okay. Here we have, I will create a label here, update student from update student in database from retrieved information. This is the retrieved information. This is the one from the database. This is the one we need to update, which is why we are comparing it with this one to see what has been updated. Then after that, save the newly updated student. How do we save it? The repository interface does not have update. It only has save. And if we look at the implementation here, you will see that if what is being provided is new, it is a new entity, save it into the database, which is known as persist. We will cover entity manager later, do not worry, inshallah, bidnillah, and God willing. Else, if it is not new, as in if it is already in the database, merge it, as in update it. If we were using entity manager, we would have to resort to two different methods, but because of the JPA repository interface, this method covers both. It automatically detects if the entity is new or if it already is in the database and you simply wish to update it. So that is the beauty of the save method. It saves you time, pun intended. So we will simply here write student repository.save. Now which one do we wish to save? We wish to save or update what is already in the database. After we override or update the new values, then we will simply return this back to the database in an updated format. So we will save new student. How does the save method detect if this is a new entity to create it or if this is a pre-existing entity to update it through this, the ID? If this does not have an ID, which will be the case here, remember, you can obviously provide your own ID here, but that defeats the purpose of what we accomplished here, which is the auto incrementation or the automatic generation. If you do not wish for that, then you will have to enter the ID yourself. So if you have a form on a website, instead of beginning the form with first name, you will begin it with an ID. But since we wish to generate it automatically, we do not need to enter the ID on the front end portion. However, if what you are passing to the save method does have an ID, that means it is in the database already. So the save method uses the ID as a form of identification to know if the entity is new or if it already exists. If the ID is already present, then the save method will insert the new data into the record that has the ID within the database. That is how the save method functions. If it does not detect that this saved entity has an ID, it will generate one for us based on this annotation here. But if it already exists, then the entity manager, which we will discuss later, it is basically the manager that is responsible for saving data into the database or updating data into the database, as well as deleting, obviously, or retrieval. The entity manager will recognize that the ID exists in the database, which was MySQL, the one that we configured in the beginning of this tutorial series. And then once it locates the record with that particular ID, it will update the information, then save the new update. That is it. You may be asking yourself, what if the update only involves a single instance variable or field, or two? Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What if the user updates only 1 out of 5, or 2 out of 5, or 3 out of 5? This approach assumes that we will update all 5. But what if we wish to update a portion of the total? That is when we use, instead of put, we use what is known as patch instead. We will cover how we can design the update using patch later on when we cover the resource class or the controller class, بإذن and God willing. So what does this mean? For the put method, if you will use this algorithm, that means you must send the information covering all instance variables. So this student must contain all values for all 5 instance variables. If it is missing at least one, this will fail and cause an error and break the code, break the program for you. What you send here, if you are using put, that is, what you send here must be complete. If your student class has 16 variables, all values of those 16 must be present in the update to override this. The reason I state that all information must be present is because of the getters. If the getter detects a null, it will assign a null for you here. Now, if your column does not accept null, then it will cause issues for you. But if it does accept null, then you do not have to worry about it. But if it does, if you accidentally forget to send, let us say for example you wish to update the first name only, so you will need to send the same last name as before, the same GPA, the same courses, and the same biography. But what if you forget to send the last name and it is set to null? Then it will cause issues for you when you wish to find a particular student with the first name or the last name. That will be problematic for you, which is why with put it is slightly annoying, because you have to be extremely attentive with what you send to avoid errors here. That is why people tend to favor patch over put, because with patch you need only focus on the field that you wish to update instead of focusing on everything. But I will show you how to cover patching in a later video بإذن and God willing. And that is it for the service class. Lastly, we will create the resource class or the controller class, which will use the service class. As you can see here, we created the entity. The student repository is connected to the entity. The service class uses the repository, and then in turn the controller class will use the service. We are basically creating a chain of transitive dependencies. Through the dependencies, we are able to connect classes together and transfer data from one class to another until ultimately it reaches the database. Or it is retrieved from the database depending on the direction. And that is it for this video. I hope this lecture was helpful and beneficial to you all. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Be safe, take care, and peace be upon you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamin إنك حميد مجيد.